Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us here this morning and taking some time out of your busy day. I appreciate you all joining. This morning, what we're here to talk about is Microsoft 365 and cloud security. And what's driven this is obviously the change in environment in the last number of months, in the last year. You know, the working world has changed. A lot of people are working from home. And the style of work has changed, and it looks like that's here to stay for an indefinite amount of time, and for remote working to become part of our daily lives. What has that done to IT and security? It's an heavily broad loss of control for businesses around their IT, and people working on work devices, company controlled devices, as well as personal devices at home to facilitate remote working. That's a loss of control in terms of security, and how much a business can control their data has been changed. What we want to talk to you this morning about is how the Microsoft 365 platform, and in particular Microsoft 365 Cloud Security and the Business Premium platform, can help you leverage some of the pre-built Microsoft security features to gain back a lot of that control going forward. As you can see from the agenda, after I finish opening messages, I'll be passing it over to Guido Marchetti, who's our guest speaker this morning, who'll be going into an in-depth technical review of Microsoft 365 and that platform as well. Following Guido's presentation, we'll have a live Q&A section where we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So please do drop some questions into the question tab over on the right-hand side of the webinar. And if we don't get a time to answer your questions, or you have a bit more of a personal question that you'd like to answer, we're happy to arrange one-to-one sessions with anybody at any time. So just drop us a note to arrange them. Before I hand over to Guido, I want to talk a little bit about Nostra and how we support our customers in terms of supporting Microsoft 365 platforms. Of course, we're a Microsoft Gold partner, and we have been since 2007, where we were the first partner in Ireland to deliver a Microsoft 365 platform. Back then it was called HMC 4.5, more palatably Microsoft 365 now. And it's sticking to our core belief of simplifying the IT within a business. What we do for clients is help them leverage pre-built Microsoft 365 platforms, the likes of SharePoint and other cloud pre-built platforms that customers are already paying for within their Office 365 subscriptions. What this allows is for businesses to have a strong IT system that's robust, that has less IT issues, less time spent on the phone to support companies, and less time spent on the phone to Nostra, and more time focusing on their core business functions. So that allows us to have a greater relationship with our clients to be more happier with IT, and clients to have a more secure and pre-built IT platform. So I'm going to hand you over to Guido now. Myself and Guido will be back at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that you might have. And again, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks very much, Adam. Thanks for the intro. I've shared my slides. Can you confirm you can see them there?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see them there, Guido.
Absolutely fantastic. So we'll get into the content. I'll bring you guys through as much as we can today. As Adam has said, if any questions pop into your mind as we're going through the content, whether it be to do with any of the aspects, please feel free to put them into the question box. To give you a little bit of a background to myself, I support a team in Nostra, and I've spent about 17 years working in the ICT industry with businesses of varying sizes. And from that time, I would have spent the last decade working around Office 365, Microsoft 365, and helping customers utilize all of that technology. So let's get into it, and let's start talking about Microsoft 365 and security in the cloud. So when we think about what's going on today and the challenges that we're seeing across businesses, when we think about what challenges we're facing, what we see top of mind across all of our customers, and this is very, very true for the team in Nostra, are the challenges around how can people work better, more securely, How can you change your security posture from the more traditional way that we used to do things to the more modern way that we should be thinking about doing things? And ultimately, as with all good businesses, how do you manage all of that without your costs spiraling out of control? Okay, we now know that your employees are working from multiple locations. As Adam's already talked about, they're also using a multitude of devices. Some are business owned, some are personal owned. I remember when COVID kicked off and March and the lockdown hit us, there was a huge shortage in hardware devices. You couldn't get them for love nor money. So these are all challenges that we've had to overcome collectively. And to make our lives that little bit more difficult, the bad actors and the cyber risks continued. And if anything, they actually amplified during that period of COVID. And we've seen a substantial amount of customers, unfortunately, that have fallen foul of some of these attacks. So as we move through our thought process, it's very important that we understand all of the threat vectors that are facing us as a business and how we go about addressing those. So some of the background again around this, as you can see from the slide, there is a substantial risk in attacks, and an awful lot of the time, particularly in mid-market and SMB, there is a mentality of, well, we're too small to be targeted. That's not true, because the challenge that you face is that the enterprises are investing in enterprise-grade technologies to protect their assets, to protect their data, which means that the cost of attack for a cyber criminal is quite high to get past those breaches and all of the protection that they've wrapped around it. So to breach through that, they've got to spend a lot of time and money and potentially invest into systems themselves to overcome them. Whereas if they come down the size of organization into mid-market and SMB, where they're less likely to have stringent controls wrapped around their data and their systems, it becomes far easier to actually breach an organization. And that has in itself some significant challenges that have got to be addressed. We can't keep thinking that it's okay because we're too small or we're not big enough. I can guarantee you are. I've seen companies of all sizes that have been targeted as part and parcel of cyber attacks. So while we think about that, businesses are asking questions. How do you secure yourself? And it's quite an interesting topic to think about. So when you have a look at some stats that we have here to share from Forrester reports that Microsoft commissioned, these are all stateside, but I can make this a little bit more local as well. So we can see here that, as I said, most SMBs will be targeted, and an awful lot of the time they're targeted with phishing or spear phishing attacks. We also see a huge amount of ransomware attack. I've seen one in April of this year. I've seen one retail outlet that was heavily targeted, and they were breached by a piece of malware which was actually installed. They tracked it back to a breached account, and that's quite pertinent to the approach that you should be thinking about. An awful lot of the time, if you track back through how the attack has happened, yes, a piece of phishing has maybe been used, because 9 times out of 10 it's a breached account. And then what happens is when they're in, as a security analyst will talk to you, it's about the lateral movement that you then need to be looking for. So they get into, I'm going to pick on Adam here, they get into Adam's account, for example, and then bilaterally they decide to move to Laura's account because Laura has some more privileges than Adam does from an admin point of view. And then from Laura's account, they move again into somebody, maybe somebody like myself, who might have a global admin or security admin setting. And now they're beginning to get deeper and deeper into the organization, and they can start running scripts, etc. It's really, really interesting. And what we can organize for anybody that's interested in seeing that is an actual run through of how one of those attacks actually happens. It's quite interesting if you've never seen how it actually operates. But again, coming back to some of the things, 50% of small businesses have experienced an attack in the past year. In Ireland, that's probably a little bit higher. It's probably closer to about 65%. And there are lots and lots of examples of that. 61% of small businesses have experienced a cyber attack. They weren't able to operate. That generally tends to be the case. The retail industry, or the retail customer I talked about, they were brought down for nearly 2.5 weeks while they were trying to restore their systems, because the choice was pay the ransomware or do a restore. And even at that, then they had to accept a certain amount of lost data. The 149K, which is in the States, the average cost of a breach in SMB. In SMB in Ireland, the average cost is actually closer to about €87,000 to organizations, and that comes from an Amoric report that Microsoft published. We will share that report with you. I actually have a copy of it, which we will share with all attendees as part and parcel of our follow-up pack to give you some of that localized insight. But the threats are very, very real, guys. And I suppose, how do you go about thinking about changing things? And before we get into that, an awful lot of the time, people will take a step back and say, are Microsoft actually a security vendor? I wouldn't associate Microsoft with security when I think about security. And very much so over the last 5 years, as Microsoft has been investing heavily into their cloud ecosystem, what people need to realize is that they are actually got more endpoints and more touch points than most of the security organizations that you would traditionally think of. And what I mean by that is that on a daily basis, Microsoft process billions of identity and access management requests, whether that's from Office 365, Xbox Live, Outlook.com. We are talking literally billions. I think the latest count that they have on a daily basis is about 4 billion individual logins, which is absolutely colossal. And then they've got other things like Windows 10 management via Intune or Endpoint Manager, as it's now called. And they have millions of Windows devices. They also have millions of iOS and Android devices under management. So they've loads of touch points that are feeding back into this honeypot which they've created, and effectively they build out all of their practices around access management, around CASB, which is cloud access brokerage, whether it's archiving of your information. They also have insight into how information is moving. So based on that, Microsoft have really started to go down into the security narrative and start building out tools that they give to you in packages like the M365 Business Premium, which we're now going to talk about. And it really starts to help you understand how you can modernize your security approach while addressing a huge amount of those challenges we've talked about. So when we think about modern security, it really does start with identity. All right, so I've already talked about how most breaches will happen. It generally starts with a phishing attack. So the challenges we're seeing is how do you protect against lost or stolen passwords? When I engage with customers and they don't have an identity and access management platform like Azure Active Directory built into their organization, one of the biggest pains in the backside that their help desk has is resetting username and passwords. Introducing something that enables secure self-service password reset is a huge cost saver and time saver for people. So feeding into that, how do we keep our costs down? By implementing something like this, you can start to recoup some time from across your organization. We are also seeing now secure access to work apps. A report that Microsoft released last week, which is the Amoric security report, talks about the fact that of the respondents, there were 500 people, organizations surveyed, and of the respondents, 43% of the respondents said that when they're accessing work apps, they're not challenged for any form of kind of authentication. It's just username, password, in you go. There's no stringent controls. There's no baseline security for allowing that access. That's something that we need to start thinking about, because that's the threat vector. So as you start moving your workloads into things like Office 365, as you start moving your data into Office 365, you now have to take a step back and start thinking about the firewall, which was the traditional gatekeeper, is now completely out of the equation. So you now have to start to rethink about the fact that the cloud by default is mobile friendly. And when I say mobile, I don't just mean a mobile phone, I mean a mobile worker. It's mobile friendly. With a username and password, I can connect any device from anywhere in the world once I've got a valid username and password. And that's why phishing has become so prevalent and has really started to take a real focus for the attackers. Because once they have that, they've got the keys to the castle, they can get in. And then finally, we've got to enable secure remote access. So those two things tie hand in hand. So they're the challenges that we see an awful lot. And this is where you really need to be thinking about starting. So when we talk about enabling secure remote access and identity management, we're talking about how do you integrate username and password across all of your platforms. What you should be chasing at a minimum is a single sign-on strategy. So single sign-on, again, is where you would have one username and password that is centrally managed, that is accessing all of your line of business applications. The advantage to that is that as you start adopting more SaaS-based applications, as you start to integrate things like your firewall, your VPN, your on-premise resources into this identity and access management platform via Azure Active Directory, you're now creating a full auditable trail of who has accessed what, where, and when. And it's hugely important to have that foundation built in. What you can then do is you can establish trust with your SaaS-based applications, your on-premise resources, and you can now then start to make it invisible for the end user. So rather than have them sign in all the time, once you enable single sign-on, you can enable them to, once they've logged into their PC, without managing the device, you make the assumption it's trusted and off it goes. But you can bring that in, and we'll talk about that now in a moment. But effectively, single sign-on allows you to make the username and password just become a one-off scenario where you go in. But Microsoft vision is deeper than that, and it's wider than that. What they want to do is they want to bring you on a journey where ultimately they want to give you the tools that you could consider going passwordless. And ultimately, from a security standpoint, that absolutely should be an aspiration that you have when you think about modern security. If you are still using username and password to access Office 365, I would strongly suggest that at a minimum, you should be enabling multi-factor authentication, which is the Microsoft Authenticator app. At a minimum, that should be your starting point. But once you've got that, start to build on top of that. Start to look at Windows 10 for Windows Hello for Business, where people's faces then actually start to become the sign-on point. And again, once you've done that and you've integrated all of the line of business applications into Azure Active Directory, the sign-on happens once when I log in with my face, and I now have access into everything. You could also look at FIDO2 security keys or RSA tokens or the likes of that, whatever it is that you fancy. And then when it comes to iOS and Android devices, again, plus Windows 10 devices, biometrics. So if you don't want to use your face, biometrics. A question that we usually get asked when you start talking about this, and in particular biometrics, is where is that information stored? Because my username and password is synced to the cloud, does that actually sync to the cloud? It doesn't is the answer. So it actually gets stored within the TPM chipset on the device. And likewise, it also gets stored on your Android or iOS device. The biometric or the facial recognition never actually leaves the physical device. It doesn't get synced anywhere, because an awful lot of the time people immediately start to worry about GDPR and, oh my God, that's personally identifiable. It's your face. It's a misconception. I wouldn't worry about it at all. It's designed in a way that information simply overwrites the username and password. It still sits in the background, but it no longer gets used as frequently. Okay, so really that's a starting point, and the reason that you would look to do that, the next slide really kind of shows where you can go with this. The whole idea is that from your end user device, where we have the sign-in point here, you're going to bring them into Azure Active Directory, which effectively is your identity and access management broker platform, and you will have integrated that, as I've already said, into all of your cloud apps. Today, it supports almost 4,000 SaaS-based applications. So if you can't find it in there, you really have found a very, very unique SaaS-based application, if it's not known to Microsoft for integration. You can also then, using Azure AD Proxy, actually present on-premise applications through the Microsoft My Apps page and actually have them presented as a tile in the My Apps page that can then be clicked on. So when you go log into Office 365 and you see, as Microsoft now call it, the waffle button, which is generally up the top left-hand corner of the screen, when you click on that, all of your apps appear. Your on-premise apps, if they're web-enabled, can be presented through a web app proxy and actually appear in there where you can click in, and again, single sign-on is delivered. And also then you can, as you can see, integrate networking technology. So again, if you've got something that isn't web-enabled, but the client needs a VPN connection to establish itself in, integrate your firewall, look to make sure that it's all tying into one overall security solution. And that's something that the team in Nostra can absolutely help you understand how to achieve. So once you've got that, you can see up the top of the screen, it says Azure Active Directory P1 is now included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. That gives you something called conditional access. And you might be familiar with that term, because in Office 365, there is a basic level of Azure AD. So most people have got a flavor of this, But where P1 gets a little better is that with the basic version, you can stipulate, I can trust a certain IP range with the basic level. And that's pretty much the only trust that you can establish into the platform. When you have Azure AD P1, however, you can start to do things a little bit more cleverly with conditional access. And when you then tie in your device management or unified endpoint management, which in this case is Endpoint Manager, formerly Intune from Microsoft, what you can start to do is you can create a zero trust security posture where only known trusted devices and managed devices are allowed to sign into your environment. And we'll talk a little bit about how you incorporate all of that. And that's some of the real value of the Azure AD P1. You can actually start to get very, very granular with your conditional access policies. So that brings us quite nicely into how do you secure personal and company devices. And that's done with Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So again, the challenges that you're going to be thinking about is how do you manage work data on a mobile device? It always surprises me the amount of people that will say that they're given a smartphone and there's no control around it, right? You can sign up to whatever you want. I could be using WhatsApp, I could be using Dropbox. Another interesting statistic I seen from the security report, if I can remember correctly, I think it was about 24% of end users admitted to using personal services such as WhatsApp, such as their own personal Gmail to share work information. That's something that you want to stop happening in your organization, because straight away that is a major red flag. So you got to think about that. You got to think about securing the devices that people are on, not just the Windows devices, but the Android, iOS, and then automate deployment is something that you can look at once you get to a level of standardization. And again, with M365 Business Premium, you actually get a tool to help you do that, which is called Autopilot. Autopilot allows you to rethink your delivery of Windows 10 devices. What you could potentially look at doing is actually having device as a service, where if you onboard a new employee in this new world of work, maybe they don't come to the office because they live in Cork or further afield, they live somewhere in Europe and they have the skills that you need. You simply ship them the device, they turn it on, they connect to their Wi-Fi, put in their Azure Active Directory credentials, and it talks to Autopilot, which in turn talks to Endpoint Manager, and then pushes the profile of that machine over the internet down to it and completely configures it. Security on, BitLocker, whatever it is that you want, whatever you're having, all done over the air, completely reimagining how we would deliver an endpoint device to the end user. So as we kick on through that, there's generally two profiles that you will have to think about. You'll have to think about a corporate owned device, which is all in, right? So the corporation buys it, the corporation owns it. Now, there are two flavors, unfortunately, of a corporate owned device. There is a corporate owned device that is all corporate, all singing, all dancing, no personal footprint. But then, which is a very, very popular choice, particularly in Ireland, there is a corporately owned device, but it is personally enabled. That will be something I would classify as a COPE device, C-O-P-E. There's another acronym for everybody's lives to learn. But COPE device is where it's corporately owned, but personally enabled. And what I mean by that is that you can't actually use one of these smartphones. That's probably not showing because of my background. I have a smartphone in my hand, but you can't use one of those smartphones without putting some type of ID into it. And that ID is either an Apple ID or a Google ID, okay? That tends to be a personal ID. That's someone's personal email address. Now, unless the organization decides to go down the road of having Android for Enterprise and Apple's business program, which has changed its name. It used to be called the DEP program. It has changed its name, and I can't think of it. But unless you've got those programs where you as the business are controlling those identities, you do have COPE devices where a personal ID has gone into it. But there are ways of managing that. So when you have the ability to manage the device, when it's corporate, you absolutely have the ability, whether it's personally enabled or not. You simply have to have the terms and conditions of your acceptable usage policy written in a way that clearly state, if we decide to wipe the device, make sure you're backing up your personal data. So ultimately, what you can do is you will enroll the devices into the endpoint management platform, and you will create standards and policies for the iOS and Android operating systems. You will also do the exact same with Windows 10. So you should create standards of the device security policy. Latest version of OS, do you need encryption? All of these type of things that you will start to think about. When you then get to another level is when you start thinking about the application management. And this is where personal devices, and this is where Intune gets quite clever, or Endpoint Manager. I need to stop calling it Intune. This is where Endpoint Manager gets quite clever insofar as it gives you the ability to not just manage the device, but if you want to ignore the device in the device state, in a personal phone, you would have to do that. So you can't really dictate certain things in a personal phone, but what you can do is you can use the MAM, which is Mobile Application Management Policies, to target the line of business applications from within Office 365. So you can target Word, Excel, PowerPoint, all of the Microsoft ecosystem. And what you can do there is you can enforce that work data can't actually move to any other type of app. So there are the two kind of processes that you will think about: your device management and then your application management. And that's key to understanding the risk vector of your edge devices, because that's effectively what these are. They're edge devices that end users use to connect into your environment. And you've got to understand how the data flows across them and where the potential risks are from that point. So when the data gets to it, where can it go from it and how do you need to control it? So you need to think about things like lateral movement of data on a smartphone, or when it comes to a Windows 10 machine, lateral movement from the C drive to potentially a USB stick. All of these things that you need to start thinking about can be addressed with the Endpoint Manager. So to give you a quick look at how a MAM policy works, the idea is that the corporate data is known to be secured in Word, for example. But you can also, as you can see, you can have both corporate data and personal data within the application. And what this is showing here is that all of the business apps are treated in a slightly different way. Now, this will look slightly different depending on the phone and the device. With Samsung devices, you can actually turn on their Samsung Knox protocol, and effectively what that does is it allows you to create a profile on the device. So there's a personal side of the device and a business side of the device. And the business side generally has a tiny little padlock on all of these applications. So the idea then is it allows you to stipulate, if I get an email, I can open that attachment in Excel, but I can't copy it to a personal app. So what it means is if I get access to a file and I want to save it or even copy it into something, because I don't want to create a trail where I've saved as and it's caught, I'm just going to do a quick copy and paste. It will prevent that from happening. Same with a Word attachment, same with all of it. And you can see that I also can prevent personal storage, so that it's just showing OneDrive personal, but that could be Google, that could be anything. It could be Box, Dropbox, all of that type of stuff. And then finally, you can save, and you're perfectly allowed to save it into OneDrive for Business. Now, that is just MAM policies at that level. You can then complement that with Azure Information Protection, which is the data classification tools that are built into M365 Business Premium, where you can actually tag data with labels, and you can push that, and those labels will follow the data. So you can target that with your DLP and MAM policies, making sure that data never leaves. You can, as you can see, separate the business and the company. And then ultimately the Intune app will allow you to correlate the difference between both and treat them in the right type of way. Hopefully all that makes sense. There's a lot of information that's been thrown at you just across those two platforms. But when you take the Endpoint Manager and Identity Access Management, tie the two of them together, you can create what I've mentioned already, which is a zero trust security posture, because your conditional access can now be set to clearly stipulate only trusted managed devices or known devices where the applications are managed can connect to your Office 365 and indeed your entire environment. All right. So now that you've got zero trust, you've really started to tighten up your controls. And now you can start to think about all of that lateral data movement, which should, if I'm right, bring us quite nicely into the whole data protection section. Now, one of the other areas that you can look at is securing the Windows device with Defender and Intune. You can see all of the different options here. This is the device state that I talked about, and I'll very quickly talk about this. You can see by default, with the configuration and the setup of Windows 10, you can enforce things like Windows Defender to be turned on, or you can work with Nostra to push your preferred antivirus down through Intune. But absolutely, one of the big things you should be looking at doing is turning on BitLocker, because BitLocker encrypting the device itself will ensure that even if the device is stolen, the C drive is encrypted. So any information that is on it, it's encrypted. And trust me when I tell you, once BitLocker enacts itself, there is no way around it. I've had to inform a customer they've got to fire a laptop into the bin because not even Microsoft can unlock BitLocker once it enacts. Okay, the advantages of having Azure Active Directory, which is a nice piece, is that when you enroll the device, the BitLocker key actually gets synchronized into the user account within Azure Active Directory. So that's a nice thing to know. So then we get to how do you enable remote desktop. I've talked very detailed, I suppose, about enabling remote working with devices, and I'm assuming fat client devices. So you're giving people Windows 10, you're giving people Android and iOS devices, right? There is another way to think about secure remote working, which is if you don't want to go to the trouble of everything I've just talked about and going to create profiles and all that type of stuff, you can turn to something like Windows Virtual Desktop, where you are centrally managing what the desktop experience is. You're delivering that through Azure. And again, now you're just controlling who can connect into that environment. So the identity piece is still key, still hugely important, but what you're doing is you're standardizing the experience. You don't really mind what device, because even if it's a personal device, they're connecting over WVD through a secure connection, and the applications are in a bubble now. Okay, so WVD will be your traditional kind of RDS environment stroke Citrix environment. It's absolutely something that a huge amount of customers are beginning to think about, beginning to look at, but it's got to fit your business. It doesn't fit everybody. So that's why Microsoft give you the option of doing it both ways. You can either go client or you can go down the WVD. So have a think about your device strategy, have a think about how you need to let access in. And then, of course, once all that is built, you have your zero trust. Then you can start thinking about the advanced threat stuff. So when we start thinking about how do you protect yourself against cyber threats and data loss, this is where Microsoft have bundled even more value technology into the platforms, starting with the M365 Business Premium, and then only getting more layered and better as you go to E3 and E5 respectively. So when we think about this, how do you protect your users against cyber threats like phishing? So again, regardless of how you've gone from a device and access point of view, if they're in a WVD or if they're on devices, it doesn't really matter. Phishing is still a threat because it's the identity that they're after. How do you safeguard confidential business data, whether it be under GDPR, whether it be under PCI, whether it's just general data protection practices that you should have in place within the organization, because depending on your organization, there could be sensitive information. I've dealt with a lot of people that will be in the food industry. They would have recipes. They're like gold to those organizations. They don't want those recipes getting out because they're unique. Likewise, most companies will tell you they absolutely do not want their payroll information getting out, right? Because that's just bad press. And even if it didn't get out, but if it got out enough within the organization where I found out Adam was earning more money than I was and we do the same job, I'd be pretty unhappy about that. And now you've got civil unrest within the organization. So how do you classify your data, and how do you make sure only the people, again, tying identity into it, making sure that people have the right access, the right level of access, and then when they do what they're supposed to do with the data, making sure the data is safe. And then how do you get visibility into all of this? One of the biggest challenges I've found over the last, I'd say, decade, particularly with the advent of the iPhone, smartphones, and the app, which is something we all just take for granted, is how do you know what your end users are using, and how can you see it, and how do you take control? And Microsoft have been very, very good in giving us the tools to try and look at doing all of that. So what you get within, again, starting with M365 Business Premium, what you get in that SKU to protect your organization from email, including Teams then as well, it also goes into Teams, you get something called Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, or it's now called Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection for Office 365. And what that gives you is it gives you the ability to enable something called Safe Links. And Safe Links is a tool that when an email comes in and it's got a link in it, it will actually, if it gets past the spam filter, because an awful lot of these links will get past the spam filter. If it gets past the spam filter and it lands on Adam's desk and it's a malicious link, but when Adam clicks on it, as you can see from the screen grab here, Safe Links kicks in and realizes that this is a spam link. This is trying to redirect Adam to some type of spoof page. An awful lot of the time, we've seen a huge increase actually of Modern attachments. So modern attachments is an actual tool that you can use within Office 365, where in Outlook you can attach a file, but it's not actually attached. It generates a link, and we're seeing a huge amount of that actually being spoofed by spammers, where they know it's being used to try and attract an end user to click on it. But the beauty of ATP is when you've got safe links turned on, it will stop that from happening. So it actually kills the connection. And that doesn't just work on a Windows 10 environment, that actually extends itself to your iOS and Android devices, which is hugely useful. It means that if the link has gotten through, whether it's a Teams chat or anything like that, it's fantastic insofar as it will catch it. You can also then configure advanced threat protection when it comes to spam filtering. So you can start creating more defined rules around how you're going to start to treat malicious looking email. There are lots of different options that you can configure, but one of the preferred ones that I always like to recommend to people is when you've got ATP, you can actually set a policy that if you believe that a piece of an attachment looks like malware, you can actually extract it. The Office 365 environment will forward the email to the person, and then what's happening at the background is it's looking at the file. So it's extracted it, it's quarantined it, and it's actually opening it up to see, is this dangerous or not? If it's dangerous, it gets destroyed and disregarded. The end user gets notified that was malicious. If it's not dangerous, what happens is it actually pushes a link down to the end user's email, so the email now has a link to retrieve the file. It's really, really quite clever, and that again comes built in as part and parcel of the ATP side of things. So you've got the ability to start doing that, and of course you then get insight to Defender AV. Now I will caveat that there is an ATP for Defender, which is at Windows 10 level. That doesn't come in Business Premium. That's when you can start to turn on at the kernel level of Windows 10 Advanced Threat Protocol and start looking for bilateral movement at the Windows 10 level. That doesn't come in Business Premium. You would actually have to go as far as the E5 SKU or have the M365 E3 with the M365 security compliance for endpoint add-on as part and parcel of your license. But again, talk to the team in Nostra if that's something that you're interested in. We can help you understand what's the best way to license yourself to get all of the tools that you want to have. So the next piece is when you have all of the kind of advanced threat stuff, how do you then protect your data? So again, Microsoft have gone out of their way to try and help give businesses the tools that they need to protect themselves. Huge amount of DLP tools built in, and they're all built around out-of-the-box templates to target the likes of PCI compliance, GDPR, huge amount. I think there's over 30 different global compliances that can be met with these templates. If you haven't started to look at them, start to look at them. And with the DLP policy, what you can do is you can create policies that will then target Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and make sure that that data that's sensitive doesn't get out. So for example, you can create a custom policy that maybe is targeting payroll information. You teach the machine learning that's written into it what to look for, and you can decide when you're setting up these policies, do you auto classify or do you not? Do you auto apply the rules or do you not? When it comes to that sensitive level of data, I would always suggest that you should probably, to start out with, to learn about it, auto classify it and then roll back if you have to. But definitely have a think about how you could capture that. So again, coming back around to payroll, creating something specific to make sure that that type of information doesn't leave the organization. You'd be looking for things like bank account numbers. You'd be looking for things like payroll. You can actually take what your payroll looks like. If it's in Sage, there will always be unique identifiers. You put those into the system and you teach it. Look out for these in a document, and if you see it, stop it from leaving the organization. And that will absolutely stop it dead in its tracks. If someone tries to attach it in an email, someone tries to send it in a links chat, in a Teams chat, if somebody tries to upload it into SharePoint and then share it from within SharePoint or OneDrive, it will be prevented. All right, so it actually will not leave the organization. And then if they want to declassify it, they'll have to come and get approval for that, right? So that's the DLP engine, and that can also then be married up with Azure Information Protection. So the Azure Information Protection, the little screen grab on the slightly larger screen here, shows you what that is. And what Azure Information Protection allows you to do is it allows you very quickly to introduce data labels that effectively create metadata and get tagged to your Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And it's not just Microsoft file types. That's a common misconception. You can actually get support for, I think it's up to 45 different file types. So PDFs, all that type of stuff, even pictures can be classified. So again, depending on the sector that you're in, if there's a need to take pictures of buildings or indeed patients potentially or anything like that, you can tag that data the way that you need to tag that data and make sure that it stays safe and sound within the bubble of your organization and your Office 365. AIP is quite clever because AIP actually extends itself everywhere. So if the data gets saved in Office 365, AIP is with it. If somebody saves it to a C drive, the AIP data tag and the protection stays with it. They save it to a server, same job. They push it out to something like Dropbox or Box because you haven't stopped that from happening yet. The protection goes with it. Again, it's all tied to identity. So what happens if, Adam, I'm going to pick on you again. What happens if Adam leaves the organization and decides to take a customer list with him? That customer list is classified as highly confidential. So AIP tags it as highly confidential. Adam's clever enough to know how to get around the DLP, so he puts it onto your USB stick. But because all of that access is tied to identity, as soon as Adam hands his notice in, he loses access to the file. Gone. Can't get access to it because he can't unlock the encryption because his account is now dead. So really, really clever in how it works. Everything, as you can see, is tying back into that identity and access piece. So it's a core part of what you're going to start to do as you start to move your security towards that modern way of thinking. So finally then, Microsoft have given us, this tool existed in this tool existed in Microsoft 365, E3 and E5. E5, this version of the tool is far more advanced, but we have the same level that we would have within E3 now available to us within the Business Premium SKU. And what it is this is called Cloud App Security. So this is Microsoft's Cloud Access Service Broker platform, which basically what it does is it can import logs from your firewall. And depending on how you've configured your Windows 10 devices, again, I'll caveat that you'll probably need the ATP to integrate it. You do need the ATP to integrate it. But what you can do is, at a minimum, you can take the logs from your firewalls and you can import it into the Cloud Discovery. You can set that up and you can automate that if you need to. Or again, work with Nostra and the team and they'll help you do it. What it allows you to do then is it allows you to see where the traffic is going. It allows you to see where people are going in terms of, are they accessing, as you can see there, OneDrive, Skype, SharePoint. But more importantly, what you want to know is are they accessing stuff that you're not aware of? So this actually helps you identify shadow IT, right? This tool has been hugely useful across organizations, helping IT teams understand, actually, we've got a whole cohort of people that are using Adobe Creative. And they actually need to use it because that's part and parcel of the business. It's the marketing team. That's absolutely fine. We're going to allow them to use that. But what we are going to do is we're going to bring it into our identity and access management platform, and we're going to deliver single sign-on into the Adobe suite. So it gives you the ability to see things that you may not be aware of. I've seen some great reports on that. I actually seen one particular end user that I used to work with. I won't say any names, but he was spending a considerable amount of time on Netflix. It caught that. It was also able to show me he was downloading a huge amount of content from Netflix. So at a minimum, this could actually help you troubleshoot latency issues that you may have on the network. It'll help you identify what's going on in terms of traffic going out the firewall, and you can start to then understand. So if you run a quality of service across your broadband, you could also use this tool to give you some of the insights on top of the insights you're getting from the provider around that area. But Cloud App Discovery is probably one of my favorite tools within the Microsoft 365 platform. It really is quite clever. If you haven't started to use it yourself, I would hugely recommend it. One of the big benefits, particularly as you're learning about what people are using, is it actually threat scores what they're using. And that's a key piece. So if it sees something, it scores it from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest and most safe. Really, really clever. And you get all of that insight buried in there, and you get insight as to who's using what. Fantastic tool, really is. Okay. So why choose Microsoft Business Premium, right? It's a great starting point is why. So as I've said, if you haven't got some of these tool sets, if you're using maybe Office 365 E1, if you're using Office 365 Premium, which is now called Business Standard. This is going to give you all the tools that you already have. It'll allow you to collaborate in real time. It'll allow you to then start thinking about security in a more modern way. Start to reimagine how you're securing information, reimagine how you're doing that remote access, and start to really rethink how you're doing absolutely everything. It gives you a huge amount of security on top of all of the great productivity tools that you're already used to. I'm going to caveat the couple of pieces here, particularly that first one. It is comprehensive and easy to use once you've got a partner like Nostra behind you that's helped you get it set up. Setting it up isn't all that easy. And the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, the more complex it can become. So having people beside you that know exactly what they're doing is hugely beneficial. Absolutely, it's comprehensive. Absolutely, it's easy to use when it's up and running. Absolutely will help you reduce costs. I've worked with some customers where we've displaced up to 15 point solutions and consolidated into one. Hugely beneficial in terms of IT time management, etc. And it is enterprise grade technology. We talked about that. We talked about earlier how enterprises have the ability to do that, and now it's bringing it down. So the only caveat with Office 365 Business Premium is it maxes out at 300 users. Once you go past 300 users, you need to look at the enterprise family. But again, you can see from this one quick slide the huge amount of technology that you're getting. So there's the old Office 365 Business Premium, which is now called Microsoft 365 Business Standard. But this is now the Microsoft 365 Business Premium, which gives you all of that great security stuff that we've just highlighted over the last, I'd say, 20 minutes, but I'm probably being generous to myself when I say 20 minutes. So look, a quick overview. Microsoft 365 Business Premium gives you everything you need from a productivity point of view, everything that you're used to. It also then gives you the ability to start thinking about building a modern security strategy and practice around identity, tying it into your device, then looking at your application security, and finally looking at your data protection and life cycle. We didn't even get into that, but we can talk about that at another stage. But understanding how you're managing your data all within that environment in one nice, neat SKU. A great starting point for any organization looking to address their security concerns as we move into FY21. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So thank you all for listening. I hope you found it somewhat useful. Adam, I believe we're now going to do some questions.
Thanks a million for that, Guido. It's Laura here. Sorry, I know we've gone a little bit over time, so if people need to drop off, that's fine. The recording will be available and we'll send it around after, but we do have a couple of questions to get through, if that's okay. So the first one we have here is from Connor. So can you confirm there is no other cost to Microsoft on top of M365 Business Premium other than the Nostra Professional Services setup?
Yeah, absolutely, and a good question, something we see an awful lot of clients asking. So yeah, there's no additional cost. I think there was one platform there that Guido mentioned in the Azure Information Protection. That's an additional cost on top of the business premium license. But everything else that Guido's gone through today is included within that Microsoft Business Premium license.
Perfect. Thanks a million for that, Adam. So we have a couple of other questions that people have emailed in that weren't able to join us today. And so one of them is why bother going through a partner like Nostra to get a Microsoft 365 plan when I can just buy it through the website using a credit card?
Yeah, that's again a very common question that we see with customers. And often when we first engage with customers, they will have subscriptions purchased with Microsoft directly via credit card. One of the points why we will go with Nostra would be for the ease of management of them licenses. We'll manage all of your licenses for you, making sure that each license is being used and you're being charged appropriately. But the most important reason of why we go with a partner like Nostra for Microsoft licensing would be to be making sure you have the right license and you're getting the full value out of that license. Often we see customers that would have business premium licenses or business standard licenses that would be only using Exchange or just using email or just using the applications that they get as part of them packages, but not taking advantage of some of the mobile device management features that are in there, some of the device management features that you can have within there, not using the likes of SharePoint and paying for additional storage in the likes of Dropbox or Box.com or any other platform there. So what we do a lot of the time is to make sure that the license that you're paying for with Microsoft, you're getting the full value out of that license.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for that, Adam. Guido, you probably covered some of this in your slides. I'm sure you did. And again, it will be sent around. But another question we've had is, what do I get for business premium that I don't get in normal business standard plan?
I suppose the key difference will be you get all the productivity tools of Microsoft 365 Business Standard, so that's straightforward. But the advantages that you get then moving to Business Premium are you get a version of Windows 10 which allows you to upgrade Windows 10 Pro to Windows 10 Business, which has some additional security features that are built into it. You will get Windows Autopilot, which will allow you to rethink how you're delivering your devices to end users when you purchase new devices and start to onboard those devices, which is a fantastic protocol. You get Azure Active Directory Premium 1, which is basically an upgrade of your Azure Active Directory from the basic level that you have with Office 365. You also get Endpoint Manager, which is the device management platform. You will also get DLP tools that you don't have in the standard version of Office 365. You will also get Microsoft Azure Information Protection, and you will get Cloud App Security. One final thing to point out, we did talk about WVD in the webinar. It is really useful to note that the licensing that comes with M365 Business Premium will allow you to utilize your desktop licensing within a WVD environment. So if WVD does become part and parcel of your strategy, M365 Business Premium is a great license to cover yourself from a compliance and licensing point of view.
Brilliant. Thanks a million for that, Guido. And then just one final question we have is, how does Microsoft security features compare to main security vendors? Again, I think that's something that you've covered off, but you may just quickly...
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one we get asked often. It's one Microsoft get asked often, and I'm sure Adam and the team in Nostra will also echo this. In recent years, Microsoft have really started to come up the ranks. So certainly now they're going toe to toe, and we had a slide earlier. I think the slides will be shared. If anybody wants to go and have a look at those slides, we just had a screen grab of those 5 different security areas that Gartner, as an independent analyst, will review, and Microsoft are in the leader quadrant of all 5 of them. So for people to be cynical of Microsoft and their security capability at this stage, I would find it hard to justify that at this point. Microsoft have become a very significant player. It's just about putting your trust in the platform. That's it.
Perfect. So that's all the questions we have there. Adam, if you want to wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Guido, thank you very much for such a great presentation. A lot of information covered there. And the message that we have for everybody again is, if you have any questions or you'd like to go into anything in a little bit more detail, please feel free to reach out to us at info@nostra.ie. We'll be sharing information out, and we've shared the contact details out as well. We're also happy to offer anybody on today's webinar a free consultation in terms of a complete security review as part of our offering of your infrastructure, but also a tailored the review of the Office 365 environment, where we'll give you an Office 365 security score and a program of how you can increase that security. So again, thank you very much for everyone for joining today, and we hope to hear from you soon.